Russia needs help. After close to 34 months of the special military operation in Ukraine, a desperate Russia has decided to call upon its alliances directly to try and make some headway in a war that has them stymied. No, not China, though the Asian nation has been practically invaluable for Putin, helping him bypass the economic sanctions imposed by most of the Western world and allowing his war machine to keep its lights on as the war raged on. We're talking about the secretive but volatile nation of North Korea. In coming to the aid of one of its few international partners, North Korea has directly answered their call by sending over 10,000 of its troops to Kursk, the site of Russia's biggest defeat during the war. But while the North Korean government is expecting to gain much prestige and valuable military experience by sending its troops into an active war zone, the soldiers themselves are unlikely to receive any gratitude for those actions. In fact, they'll be lucky to even be acknowledged for their effort. You see, the North Korean troops that are believed to be stationed in Kursk are unlikely to be that valuable to Russia. Even worse, Ukrainian intelligence suggests that a vast majority of these troops are expected to only receive a few months of training and die during the war, accomplishing practically nothing for either Russia or North Korea in the meantime. In fact, it could be said that the fate of the North Korean soldiers who are transported to Kursk is even more grim than that of North Korean prisoners in the country's labor camps. To get a sense of the scale of North Korean labor camps or prisons and the conditions inside, we can take a look at extensive reports made by the United Nations. The reports were made by collaborating stories from eyewitness accounts and interviews with former prisoners who were lucky enough to survive the ordeal and be set free, or escape the prisons altogether, and then managed to flee North Korea entirely. The most recent such report came from July 2024, which was compiled with 183 interviews between 2015 and 2023. This means that just around 23 people per year managed to escape the labor camps in North Korea. Of course, it's highly likely that the actual number of people who survive the camps themselves is higher, as we have no reliable metrics on the number of prisoners held in the camps, their full capacities, or other relevant figures. However, the interviews that the UN did manage to conduct with the relatively few survivors paints a disgustingly grim picture of the conditions found in the camps. The UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk commented that the prisoners are forced to work in intolerable conditions, often in dangerous sectors with the absence of pay, free choice, ability to leave, protection, medical care, time off, food and shelter. They are placed under constant surveillance, regularly beaten, while women are exposed to continuing risks of sexual violence. The treatment of the prisoners could be described as separated into 6 different categories: labor detention, i.e. forced labor in the camp, mandatory and compulsory jobs assigned by the state government, which often withheld any pay, military conscription, shock brigade service, mobilized work within the state, and mobilized work abroad. While the UN report outlines the various differences between these types of work, such as the exact minutiae of how the work is performed and how each prisoner can be filled in to a specific role, all of these 6 categories have more things in common than not. For example, the reports indicated that practically every instance of forced labor, whether it was in a camp or on site, was predicated on the fact that the laborers would be subjected to extremely harsh conditions, oftentimes having practically no room or privacy. The food situation was especially dire, with some escapees reporting that they could be fed as little as 3 ounces of corn per day. The forced labor and the prevailing food shortages are compounded by the fact that some sentences in North Korea transcend familial bonds and generations. Prisoners could be put there based on what their close family members have done, and entire generations of a family could serve lifelong sentences in labor camps together, practically becoming enemies to each other in the process. The guards would ration food so strictly and create divides among the prisoners to the point where it would become more advantageous to report on your family and curry favor with the guards in the process. Take the infamous story of Shin In-gwen, which showed that children were particularly affected by the brainwashing and mental and physical torment that went on in the camps. Shin, who was actually allowed to be born inside the camp as a way for the guards to supposedly reward his father for his work skills, accepted life in the prison so strongly that he considered the guards to be above his own family. When his mother and brother made plans to escape, Shin informed the guards, who then executed them. The scope of mistreatment in the prison camps was primarily founded on the practically endless malnutrition that the people inside were subjected to. Faced with the prospect of eating far below what was normal for a human, prisoners would quickly grow jealous or hateful of other prisoners, as if they were in competition for the already meager food supplies. The malnutrition was combined with torture and physical mistreatment that the UN openly called a breach of basic human rights in its reports. These factors often combined to make the prisoners practically shells of their former selves. An interview with a former prisoner indicated that they could be starved to the point where they could lose dozens of pounds in a month. One prisoner's weight was estimated to have dropped from 132 pounds to just 82. The diet, which was primarily composed of corn feed and rice bran, was compared unfavorably to animal feed, which forced many prisoners to subsist on eating rats, cockroaches, and other pests that could be found in the agriculture-related complexes of the camps. The sheer scale of horror that went on in North Korean camps, especially before the turn of the century, will likely remain a hotly contested subject for decades. However, outside pressure from the UN, which was also likely compounded by the pressure from North Korea's two allies and neighbors, China and Russia, has led to conditions in prison camps slightly improving over time. This is corroborated by an interview with a prisoner who was in one of the camps not once but twice, the first time in 2000 and the second in 2017. His treatment, although horrible when viewed through an objective lens, showed that North Korean prisoners likely had much better chances of survival in recent years than they did at the turn of the century, even if those odds were far below what would be considered normal in civilized society. Specifically, the interviewee went as far as to call some of his treatment during his second imprisonment term a no-stress environment. This goes in line with the continuous mental and physical abuse leading to prisoners normalizing and acclimating to their captors' behavior. In essence, when they were deprived of so much, even smaller mercies, such as being given blankets during winter, which saw temperatures drop to -10 degrees Fahrenheit in North Korea, were seen as significant improvements in their well-being, if you stretch the meaning of the phrase well-being to its limits. As mentioned, work camps aren't the only way North Korea imposes forced labor. Mandatory military service in the country can be a grueling prospect for the citizens as well. The state mandate requires every man to serve for 8 years and every woman to serve for 5 years. This is even an improvement from the previous requirements, which were a decade for men and 7 years for women. The astronomical mandatory military service duration, which applied to the vast majority of the population, has led to North Korea having one of the largest militaries in the world, with 1.32 million active service personnel. Let's compare this number to the military power of the strongest nations in the world. China has roughly 2 million active troops, India has around 1.4 million active soldiers, and the US has slightly over 1.32 million. But the actual total population puts things into a much different perspective. China and India have over 1.4 billion people, and the US has around 330 million residents. North Korea, in comparison, has only 26 million people. This means that North Korea is arguably one of the most militarized nations in the world. Due to the lengthy mandatory military service requirements, it also has a significant percentage of people who have gone through military service and can be drafted in times of war. Some estimates suggest that North Korea could draft roughly 8 million people during wartime, practically a third of its population. While the numbers of active personnel indicate that North Korea has a thriving army, the reality doesn't align with that sentiment. The government treats military conscripts only slightly better than people in work camps, expecting soldiers to provide a regular and steady supply of free labor to the state, often in construction and agricultural work. The environments in which the work is done are practically no different from labor camps, as the UN reports have suggested that soldiers often lack basic human necessities, including enough food, water, shelter, and even healthcare. Some UN reports indicate that tuberculosis is particularly present among the conscripts, and the country as a whole is listed as high risk for the disease by the World Health Organization in 2023. North Korea experiences relatively frequent spikes in tuberculosis and other infectious diseases due to the country's lack of access to advanced healthcare. Some programs that were supposed to have provided steady import of TB drugs have stopped operating after the pandemic, only exacerbating the problem. With the combination of grueling work, poor life quality, and lack of access to basic human needs, the average North Korean soldier is likely going to be extremely ill-equipped to handle an actual combat situation. And this is not even counting the fact the country has practically no modern training capabilities. The last time North Korea was in active conflict was in 1953, when the Korean War stopped and the Korean Demilitarized Zone was drawn up by the two inheritor countries and their allies. Since then, North Korea's army has practically been raised by the equipment, methodology, and ideology of the Soviet Union, a country that ceased to exist in 1991. In fact, most of North Korea's military equipment stems from Soviet times, including their meager supplies of tanks, aircraft, infantry support vehicles, and artillery. These vehicles have likely been maintained and perhaps even slightly upgraded from their baseline designs when they were imported from the Soviet Union. However, that still leaves most of North Korea's military equipment arsenal at 40 to 80 years old, putting it considerably behind modern militaries or even those of developing countries. The combination of old vehicles and lack of actual combat experience means that new North Korean troops are at the mercy of whatever training the government can scrounge up from its two neighboring allies. And considering that both Russia and China have limited their investments in the country over the past few decades, it's unlikely that they've created many joint exercises or overhauled training methodologies. All of this indicates that North Korean soldiers are significantly behind the times compared to Western equivalents, using obsolete equipment and tactics that likely have no place in modern wars. But what does this mean for the troops that the country has shipped to Kursk in November? Well, North Korea has likely sent some of its best troops to fight Putin's war. These soldiers are likely to stem from the military's more elite units, those with better access to training and who likely haven't undergone the full extent of torture indicative of prison camps and mandatory military service labor. Even if the soldiers haven't volunteered for duty, they have likely been pressured to join the Kursk units under the threat of their families being put in labor camps. As mentioned, North Korea is big on generational familial punishment. This likely means that the soldiers will be monitored for their activity and behavior in the Russian military, and are going to be put on a short leash, so to speak, in terms of what they can and can't do. Some soldiers might consider the fighting in Kursk to be beneficial to their social standing and be willing to go into combat. Russia is paying North Korea for every soldier they receive the same salary they would a native Russian conscript, $2,000 per month, which is likely hundreds of times over the average North Korean wage. Even if the North Korean government keeps 90% of the earnings the soldiers make, that's still a sizable chunk of money that might go to the soldiers' families back home. In some cases, even their death would bring the family significant social standing and glory in North Korea, which could indicate that North Korea might even start sending more soldiers in the long run. But regardless of the circumstances that brought the North Korean soldiers to Kursk and the potential benefits they could reap from the situation, they're still going to face potentially insurmountable problems when fighting against Ukraine. First off, there's the fact that North Korean soldiers likely don't speak Russian at all. Ukrainian intelligence has caught communication between Russian soldiers that indicates that the Russian natives simply don't know what to do with their North Korean allies when the latter are unable to comprehend more than the bare minimum of both verbal and non-verbal commands. The same report suggests that North Korea will use senior officers or dedicated translators to act as go-betweens, but this is unlikely to have a significant result on unit cohesion and cooperation. When push comes to shove, it's possible that Russian soldiers would likely give their North Korean colleagues commands that would actively put them in harm's way and have them act as decoys or bait. It could lead to mixed Russian-North Korean units having desperately low survival rates, especially for North Korean soldiers. Secondly, there's the matter of a lack of training. Reports from the front indicate that Ukraine still hasn't faced large numbers of North Korean troops in Kursk, suggesting that Russia is still somewhat willing to prepare them for the inevitable onslaught. However, the technological and tactical disparity between the two militaries is likely beyond something that can be fixed in a few months. Pair this with the fact that North Koreans would need to be trained by North Korean officers due to language barriers, and the training regime is likely going to be shoddy and ineffective at best. In particular, North Korean troops will have the hardest time dealing with the emergent tactics that have been developed and perhaps even perfected during the war in Ukraine. Drone warfare. The Ukrainian military has started using drones in every type of military altercation, from short-range infantry-based tactics to mid-range artillery barrages to long-range targeted strikes deep into Russian territory. The extent, scale, and variety of drones that Ukraine uses have allowed the country to practically bypass the need for a large navy and air force. In fact, the Russian Black Sea Fleet was forced to retreat to Crimea in November 2022, in part due to newly developed sea-deployed kamikaze drones. Even worse, Ukraine has combined multiple types of drones into entire units, utilizing long-range drones as eyes in the sky and remote relays for short-range first-person view drones. This means that Ukraine can devastate Russian infantry with negligible risk and repercussions to its own army, significantly altering the terms of engagement in its favor. The North Korean military simply isn't ready or trained to fight in a war of this scale and technological dependency. The soldiers, who are unlikely to be even properly trained in infantry-based tactics, are going to be caught completely off guard by Ukraine leveraging drones in Kursk. They will be sitting ducks against an enemy that can target them from the sky, chase them inside reinforced areas, and even destroy armored vehicles with a single, well-positioned kamikaze drone. And as mentioned, the Russian soldiers and officers are likely going to take full advantage of this, and not to the benefit of North Korean troops. Unfortunately, the most likely scenario in combat engagements in Kursk involving North Korean soldiers will see them being used as human bait. The Russians will likely separate the Russian and North Korean soldiers, giving the latter minimal defensive equipment, guidance, or even training to improve their chances of survival. Then those soldiers will be left to their own devices in the hopes that Ukraine will focus its drones on the North Koreans. The Russian units could then try to spot the Ukrainian drone operator command centers and target them with long-range strikes, something that might not work if Ukraine manages to fully develop its drone technology to outrange common Soviet artillery. In essence, North Koreans are likely going to die by the thousands if they're ever fully deployed in Kursk. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and Military Intelligence suggests a survival rate of around 10% in the long run. While there are no exact figures about the survival rate inside North Korean labor camps, it's estimated to be 75%. That's much higher than the expected survival rate of the North Korean soldiers in Russia. With Russia steadily losing more and more soldiers, it's likely a matter of when, rather than if, North Koreans will be forcibly deployed en masse. Ukraine claims it's mowing down Russian troops at a rate of over 1,300 per day, which is an increase from the Russian daily casualties during the disastrous summer campaign and the initial invasion of Kursk. At these rates, the first batch of 10,000 North Koreans that's stationed in Kursk might be decimated within a few months. And there's another possibility that could be equally harrowing for the North Korean troops. They might be used as construction and testing crews. With the mandatory military service requirements in North Korea already requiring construction work, this could lead to Russia utilizing those soldiers to dig trenches and reinforce front lines. This could lead to a significant drop in earning potential, prestige, or even access to facilities that the Russian military provides to its soldiers. In short, the North Korean troops would be treated worse than Russia's own conscripts, who were left by themselves on their posts in Kursk and surrendered when the first wave of Ukrainian soldiers came their way. If that repeats, the North Korean soldiers could be treated much worse, not by Ukrainians who capture them, but by the North Korean government, who might consider them defectors and punish their families. Alternatively, the North Korean troops might just be used as shock troops for the Russian and North Korean military to test weapons or defensive systems, particularly in an attempt to counter Ukraine's drone advantages. This could mean that they might be actively used as disposable targets more than the native Russians. Putin would get more soldiers to use in his war against Ukraine, and North Korea would get valuable experience with modern tactics and equipment that it's undoubtedly receiving from Russia in return. All things considered, while some soldiers might think of their deployment to Russia as an honor, in reality, they are likely going to be treated more like cattle moved to slaughter, and Russia aims to fully recover the territory it lost in Kursk by the time the talk of peace agreements enters the picture. In that case, Putin will undoubtedly deploy the North Korean troops sooner rather than later. For many of those soldiers, their first encounter with the Ukrainian military will also be their last. But what do you think? Will North Korean troops actually make a difference in the war? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Now go and check out North Koreans Had Enough. They Want to Go Home, or click this other video instead.